Okay. Okay, good morning, everyone. I think we can get started. I think we're ready to go technically. So we will get started. My name is Gina Womack. I am the coach. I'm sorry. I am the coach vice chair. Thank you. I keep wanting to say what my title is. And unfortunately, Representative or Senate-elect Duplessis was under the weather this morning. So he called and said he wouldn't be able to make it, and he sends his regrets. And so we're going to get started with the roll call.
I am Amaya Ewell. I am the new contact person for Juvenile Justice Reform Act Implementation Commission. I'm gonna now call roll. So you have Marcus Bryant, Heather Cloud, Bridget Denicola,
Present.
Piper Griffin, James Lemoyne, Richard Pittman,
Here.
Machina Womack,
Present.
Tracy Woods.
Present.
So can I just also introduce Commissioner Jay Darden, who's actually serving on the board, right?
Yes,
and we've been so blessed to have Bridget join us and keep us informed. I'd like to welcome everyone here. I'm excited that we have Amaya here to support us. And so we don't unfortunately have a quorum at this moment. Maybe someone will join us a little bit later, so we won't be able to approve the minutes. I'm excited that we're have this opportunity to meet today. This is going to be the last meeting of this year. We've been very productive, I believe, this moving forward this year, so we're really happy about that. The first thing we're going to have today is parent and youth testimony. We have a video to show to you all. Unfortunately, our young people were unable to take from school, and as well as some of our parents take off from work. Families, I just want to state for the record, the families and young people were very disappointed and dismayed. They came to the Children's Cabinet meeting last week and were held in the hall. And so, and were not able to have their voices shared to the governor during his testimony. So to avoid being disappointed again this time, they decided to make a video. And so we'll present that to you all now.
Being a mother and feeling helpless to help your kids, it's a bad feeling. When there's nothing you can do and everything is out of your hand, but I will stand up and be a voice for my child and others. Every day I find myself stressed with the governor's decision. I'm sitting waiting by my phone for bad news. Every night before I go to bed, I cry myself to sleep begging God to open doors for my son. It's a heavy weight on my heart. The solutions I would love to see is that the state invests in services and support and rehabilitation for our youth. I feel as a mother, they created this. OJJ had him in confinement without mental health. It is why he is traumatized by the past events that happened in their facilities. And they cannot expect him to act in a normal manner. When they took him into custody, I was with the understanding that he would get the help he needed to be a protective citizen. And all this did was make everything worse. And still, he has no services. They should be held in contempt. I have everything lined up. He has the medical card to make sure he gets the counseling he needs. And the state failed to provide that while in their custody. My son seen things in there that he should have never seen in the world. That he would wouldn't see in the world. He was forced to fight. They took the innocence from him and forced him to toughen up and act like a man at his age because he had no man or no one he could turn to while experiencing all of these things. He had to deal with them in his own mind with no guidance. They taught him how to be rootless. They told him he had to adapt to this environment and survive. And now I pray that the court allows my son to be released so that I can begin healing and rehabilitating him.
I'm 16 years old and I stay in New Orleans, Louisiana. And I just want to say, um, instead of locking children up, if we really care about the crime and the children's mental health, then I feel like we should actually get to know who they are as a person first before locking them up and throwing them in the trash. Because what you're doing when you lock a teenager up, you locking them up for making a big mistake. How old were you when you made your biggest mistake? And what was your big mistake? A lot of times we don't have people to like look up to or to hear us. Sometimes it could be a call for help. We never know. The school systems are set to fail us. We don't really have teachers who like care enough to know who their students are, especially if you troubled. Normally the troubled quote like normally the troubled kids are like counted out and it's not okay because then they will turn to the streets or whatever you want to call it, but it's really something deeper than that. If we really care, then we should invest in more programs to help children. We should invest in children's mental health. The school systems could be better, and we could have different outlooks on the stuff that's going on in our community. Um, Setting really does change. Like it really does create a difference where you at. So instead of counting us out because we kids making mistakes, carjacking, whatever you want to say, then help us instead of throwing us away because we don't have to be there because of something we did when we was young. That's throwing us away. That's setting us to fail when we get out of jail.
I believe that incarceration is basically modern day slavery and it shouldn't exist to an extent. I also believe that juvenile prison shouldn't exist. Instead, they should come up with a rehabilitation plan to break the cycle instead of putting juveniles that committed a crime in their young ages in prison for the rest of their life or until their adulthood, just so when they go back outside, they commit the same crime and go back to jail and the cycle repeats. So in order to break the cycle, they need to fund youth systems for skills they could learn and make it easier for when they get out of jail to fund themselves, make it easier for them to get to their court dates, and make it easier for them to not feel like when they get out of jail they're still in jail because of probation and house arrest. Instead, give them alternatives and make them feel like life is worth living and it's not something you have to be so violent in to survive.
I am 17, and what I would like to see instead of prisons are rehabilitation centers that work and more jobs for our community and our youth.
So thank you for allowing the voices of parents and young people to enter this space this morning. Since the juvenile justice was passed back in 2003, when this commission was first envisioned and set up, there was a lot of work that happened, and Louisiana was on the path um, to kind of, I guess, make history and just do great things for our young people. So our youth and our families today are a reminder of what is possible. They want to dream, and I think if we spent time dreaming, that we could be able to support and help our young people and help them grow and thrive. And as they've said, not meet all of their youthful mistakes with cages. To there are some good things that's happening, but the great thing about the juvenile justice reform that was passed in 2003 was that it didn't just look at the prison system. It just didn't look at OJJ. It recognized that if we wanted our young people to become their brilliant selves, that we had to make sure that they were receiving the services on the front end and the education that they all deserve. And so those things haven't really happened. This commission was defunct for several years and we revitalized it. And I'm hoping that what transpired this year is going to really set us up for greater things to happen next year, and that we all can recommit to being a consistent partner so that we can co-create a Louisiana that I think we can all be proud of. Recently, I think folks know that the governor announced and sent that youth would be transferred to Angola, a former plantation, and be held in death row. We were hopeful that that didn't happen. Unfortunately, 8 young people have been transferred. So there are things in the works that I'm gonna remain hopeful for. As they say, it's always darkest before dawn. So I'm going to stay mindful and hopeful. And so as we move through the agenda, we'll hear from folks that's going to share with us what is happening, and obviously not only locally, but I'm happy to have Ms. Liz Ryan, the administrator from the Office of Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention from DC. She's going to come and give remarks. My apologies, the agenda says testimony. Unfortunately, because we do not have a quorum, we can't directly change it to remarks, but I want to go ahead and put on the record that Ms. Ryan is going to come today and share remarks. And so we want to welcome her from DC and appreciate that the folks in Washington are very interested in what's happening here in Louisiana, because we know they say it's as the South goes, and what's happening with our young people here in Louisiana, we certainly don't want it for them, and we certainly don't want anything like this to happen to any other young person across the country. So Ms. Ryan, and I think the clicker is there. And,
Is it okay to go ahead? Okay. Good morning. My name is Liz Ryan. I am the administrator for the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention at the U.S. Department of Justice, better known as OJJDP. I'd like to thank Senator Duplessis, Chairman of the Juvenile Justice Reform Act Implementation Commission, and to Vice Chair Womack for inviting me here to speak today. And thank you to all the members of the commission for your focus on our young people. I'd also like to acknowledge the youth and families who presented earlier, and also to my fellow panelists, Allison Zimmer, staff attorney and Skadden Fellow for the Louisiana Center for Children's Rights, and Assistant Secretary Curtis Nelson from the Office of Juvenile Justice. I'm here today with members of our senior leadership at OJJDP, Janet Cianconi, Deputy Administrator, and also Tanine Bradford, Associate Administrator of our State and Tribal Relations and Assistance Division. For those of you who may not be familiar with our work, I'm trying to get this here. OJJDP is a federal agency created through the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act to help ensure youth safety and well-being. Since its inception 50 years ago, OJJDP has provided national leadership, coordination, and resources to prevent and respond to delinquency and youth victimization. Our support helps states, territories, and tribes develop equitable juvenile justice systems that create safer communities and empower young people to lead productive lives. I'm here today to talk about how the Federal Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention can provide assistance to Louisiana's youth justice system. As the only federal agency focused on youth who are involved with or at risk of becoming involved with the juvenile justice system, OJJDP is committed to enhancing the welfare of America's young people and broadening their opportunities for a better future. We work to achieve these goals by providing support to the juvenile justice field to treat children as children, serve children at home with their families and communities, and open up opportunities for young people involved with the justice system. We are also committed to confronting racial inequity and to elevating the voices of young people and their families who are directly impacted by the juvenile justice system. I truly believe that everyone here shares a common objective: to advance what is best for our youth, families, and communities. To achieve that worthwhile goal, together we can work to address youth needs and help every child achieve their fullest potential. The way forward for Louisiana, indeed for all states, is to rely on research and data, which tell us very plainly what works and what does not work in juvenile justice. I'd like to briefly share our office's priorities. First, we focus on treating children as children. This priority is grounded in a fundamental scientific understanding that children are distinctly different from adults. Research tells us that the regions of the brain governing impulse control and risk avoidance are not fully formed until a person is in their mid-20s. Consequently, adolescents are prone to impulsive, emotional, and risk-taking behavior. However, this is a transitory phase in human development. Most youth will, without intervention, age out of delinquent behavior as they mature. The Supreme Court has repeatedly acknowledged in cases like Roper v. Simmons, Graham v. Florida, and Miller v. Alabama that young people's developing brains make them less culpable than adults for their transgressions and more capable of rehabilitation. This understanding undergirds the basis for the juvenile justice system. Let me be clear on this point. Children do not belong in adult jails, and certainly not in adult prisons or in the adult criminal justice system. Adult prisons and an adult correctional approach harms children and undermines the goals of juvenile justice reforms. Our second priority is serving kids at home with their families and their communities, and our third priority is opening up opportunities for young people involved with the justice system. At OJJDP, we are also committed to confronting racial inequity and elevating the voices of youth and their families impacted by the juvenile justice system. Studies show that youth of color are more likely than white youth to be arrested and enter the juvenile justice system, and they're more likely to be prosecuted in adult criminal court and placed in adult jails and prisons, even when charged with similar offenses. So here are a few reasons why young people must not be confined in adult prisons. First, as noted in the Prison Rape Elimination Act, or PREA, youth are 5 times more likely to be sexually assaulted in adult facilities than in juvenile facilities, often within the first 48 hours of incarceration. The National Prison Rape Elimination Commission's 2009 report underscored a need to act, stating that, quote, more than any other group of incarcerated persons, youth incarcerated with adults are probably at the highest risk of sexual abuse, end quote. The statistics grow more disheartening. In comparison to their peers in juvenile facilities, youth held in adult facilities are 36 times more likely to die by suicide. Third, young people in adult facilities are often subjected to physical violence, either as victims or witnesses. These children are literally fighting for their lives. Living in a prolonged state of fight or flight often leads to lifelong trauma and health complications. Fourth, in a misguided effort to keep young people safe in adult prisons, some adult prisons will hold youth in extended periods of isolation. Others use solitary confinement to counter staff shortages or to fulfill PREA's sight and sound requirement. The use of solitary confinement for any reason can lead to great psychological, physical, and developmental harm, and it should be discontinued. Fifth, adult prisons simply are not equipped to provide the programming necessary for a child's healthy development. They deny children access to age-appropriate care, therapy, and educational and vocational training necessary to prepare them to return to their communities. Youth also need community and family connections to thrive. Without these supports, too many youth never develop the decision-making skills they need to move forward in life. Harsher punishment for justice-involved youth may, in fact, endanger public safety. It is for these reasons and more that OJJDP immediately reached out to the Louisiana Office of Juvenile Justice and to the governor in July when we learned that youth under the custody of the Juvenile Justice Agency were soon to be transferred from juvenile facilities to the Louisiana State Penitentiary at Angola, where operational failings have been extensively documented over the years and continue today. In reaching out to OJJ and the Office of the Governor, we expressed grave concern over the plan to house children in a maximum security adult prison. We offered the Office of Juvenile Justice direct support to help identify more appropriate placement options. Moving youth to this maximum security prison complex constitutes a major reversal for juvenile justice. We stand by that offer to assist Louisiana, including the Juvenile Justice Reform Act Implementation Commission, in reforming your juvenile justice system and improve outcomes for Louisiana's youth and families. And if anyone has questions about the assistance that my office is offering, our staff and I will be glad to go over these options with you in more detail after this meeting. In terms of federal resources, Louisiana has approximately $4 million in active OJJDP federal grant funding, which can be blended and braided together to make impactful change for the state's justice-involved youth. In fiscal year 2021, Louisiana's Office of Juvenile Justice received a competitive award from OJJDP under the Enhancing Juvenile Justice Reform and Reinvestment Program. The sole purpose of this grant is to work on improving and reforming the system. This funding provides Louisiana with an opportunity to find real, long-term solutions to its juvenile justice crisis. The state also has 3 active Title II formula grant awards and received OJJDP funding under our Reducing Risks for Girls in the Juvenile Justice System. We also offer no-cost training and technical assistance to our grant recipients, and we will ensure the Commission and its partners have an OJJDP point of contact available to work directly with you. Technical assistance can cover a lot of areas, from staff training and long-term planning to assessing youth needs and identifying community-based placement options. So I'd like to share several recommendations for you for your consideration. First, we recommend that children be removed immediately from Angola. Children do not belong in adult prisons. Second, we recommend an assessment of OJJ's incarcerated youth population to identify which youth could be released to community-level services and monitoring. Third, Louisiana's juvenile court judges are essential to the success of these reforms. Judicial cooperation is necessary to successfully transfer youth to community and alternative placements. Fourth, we recommend that the Office of Juvenile Justice and the Louisiana Commission on Law Enforcement partner with effective community-based organizations like the Youth Advocate Program, YAP, to transition appropriate youth back into the community. YAP utilizes an individual case planning and management approach when working with youth whose needs are complex to help them, to keep them in their homes and communities. Fifth, we recommend that the Office of Juvenile Justice implement programs that help youth with fewer than 6 months left on their custodial sentence transition or step down from restrictive housing to less restrictive environments. Louisiana could pilot this in jurisdictions with the largest numbers of youth in custody using existing wraparound services. Sixth, we recommend that the Office of Juvenile Justice implement specialized training and technical assistance for OJJ's leadership and facility managers to address facility management and conditions of confinement for young people. And finally, we encourage this commission, the JJRAIC, to oversee the successful implementation of these reforms over the long term. A sustained commitment is critical to making the changes that are needed for youth and their families. This means fully resourcing and staffing this commission. At OJJDP, we're here to support you every step of the way as you work together to address challenges confronting Louisiana's juvenile justice system. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You wanted questions, would you entertain any questions at this moment?
Sure. Or do you want to have everybody go and then do questions after that?
I don't know, I mean, does anyone have any burning questions at this moment? Because, you know, I personally, if I had a question, I'd forget by the time. Anyone, even in the audience, does anyone have any? Okay. So,
Yes, I do have one question, and thank you for that presentation. I do ask, can you clarify the $4 million that you say Louisiana is receiving? Is that money that both OJJ and LCLE is receiving?
So it's a combination of resources through competitive grants and formula grant funding. Some of that is with the Law Enforcement Commission. So I'd be happy to have our staff who are here talk with you about the detail of those grants if you'd like.
Thank you.
Thanks.
yes, sir.
You did say public, didn't
Yeah,
you?
yes.
So I serve on the OJJDP SAC board for Louisiana, Stephen Philippi with Louisiana State Institute for Public Health and Justice. We've recently lost a lot of funding. I just want to make sure that the group is aware of that because of, we're not following the rules of OJJDP as a state right now. And in fact, we had to call a special meeting and request it to happen so we could discuss solutions to why we're losing this money and giving it back. So I appreciate you offering the funds, and I appreciate you offering assistance. We would certainly welcome that, including at the SAG board level, I believe.
Thank you, and we're happy to talk with you afterwards. We'll be here for a little bit about that.
Great, yeah, thank you.
Richard Pittman with the Louisiana Public Defender Board. I'm the Director of Juvenile Defender Services. Do you have a sense of whether in the COVID and post-COVID environment, other states have seen similar issues to what we've seen, and what those other states have done to navigate it?
Could you clarify what you mean? Do you mean in the juvenile justice system? Or
In the
just more
juvenile
broadly?
justice system.
You know, that's something that we're looking at. I know there have been a number of analyses by the Annie Casey Foundation and by the Urban Institute and others, and that's something that we're taking a close look at. What I can tell you is that we released data recently showing a couple of things. One, that the overall incarceration rates in the past 20 years nationally have been going down. For at least the 20th year in a row, the incarceration rates are continuing to drop, and the same thing with crime among young people. So we're seeing both a drop in youth arrests and youth arrests for violent crime, and also a drop in incarceration at the same time. So what we see from that is that there is a shift away from incarceration, away from punitive responses to youth offending, and to investments in youth in their community.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Zimmer.
Great, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak. Thank you to members of the commission. My name is Allison Zimmer. I am a staff attorney and Skadden Fellow at the Louisiana Center for Children's Rights. I've been focusing for the past 2 years on education in OJJ secure care facilities. So I'm here today to speak with you all about a report that LCCR recently released about a month ago. It's available on our website, www.lakidsrights.org. I believe Mr. Nelson also has a physical copy with him. There's only a handful of physical copies, but the best way to view it is on our website. But I wanted to speak with you a little bit about the report, the main findings, and really the motivation behind it. So I like to begin with a story. There we go. So I think it's helpful to kind of understand a little bit about the experiences that our clients have. So Louisiana Center for Children's Rights is the juvenile public defender in New Orleans. We work with youth upon arrest, but we continue to represent our clients when they are in custody, for those that are in custody. The report focuses on youth that are in OJJ secure care facilities, so the deepest end of the juvenile justice system. So we describe a number of client experiences in the report. All of the clients' names are anonymized, but this is an example of a client whose experience I think helps to illustrate some of the challenges that are existing in schools in OJJ facilities right now. So Terrence was a client that I began working with about 2 years ago when I first started at LCCR. He had been in OJJ secure care facilities moving around for about 3 years. And during that time, he would complain pretty regularly to our staff before I started that he wasn't going to school all the time. There were weeks where school was canceled without much notice. There were weeks where a few days a week there wouldn't be school, or maybe they would go to school for an hour and then be brought home or back to their dorm. And it wasn't always clear why. But despite all of that, he felt like he was doing what he needed to do. He was getting good grades. He was continuing to progress in his classes. And when he returned home, he was pretty excited to enter a community school and thought that he was prepared to graduate. He was ready and expected to graduate that year. And unfortunately, when I started to work with him and helped him enroll in a school in the community, he learned that that was not the case. He was going to have to repeat a full grade because he had been placed in the wrong classes when he was in OJJ facilities. So he had been passing his classes, but wasn't getting credits that could be used towards his graduation plan. And then when he started school, he found that the material was a lot more rigorous than what he was getting at OJJ. So in OJJ schools, his classes, he felt like they were pretty easy. He was getting A's and B's. He wasn't passing the standardized tests, which are required to graduate. So that, to me, seemed like a little bit of a red flag that maybe the material wasn't rigorous enough if he was doing so well, but not getting the knowledge he needed to pass those tests. And then at school in the community, the same thing happened where he was really struggling. And eventually, unfortunately, he dropped out. So, to me, I think this raised a number of issues. It made me wonder what's going on at the adult level and at the institutional level that this could happen to a kid like Terrence. I think it also is an important story because for me, it helps to debunk a lot of the myths and common narratives that we hear about youth in OJJ custody or about youth in general in juvenile prisons. I think there's a common perception that maybe they're not doing well in school, or maybe they're dropping out because they don't want to learn, or they're not ready to learn, or they're not taking advantage of what's offered to them. And in the 2 years that I've been at LCCR, I have not met a single student that hasn't wanted to learn. They're motivated to learn. They want to walk across the graduation stage. They talk about that all the time. They talk about their goals, and they have big dreams. And Terrence was no exception to that. He really wanted to graduate and was excited to do that. And unfortunately, he felt like the challenges were just too difficult when he returned home. So based on Terrence's experience, based on the experience of other clients that I worked with at LCCR, we began to look into this issue a little bit more and wanted to understand, what is the data, how are OJJ schools performing more broadly beyond individual students? What is the structure for funding and for accountability that's in place in the state? And what does closure information look like? Is this happening across the board? So we started to file a number of public records requests. We reviewed publicly available data on the Department of Education website and other similar sources. and did a lot of interviews with students, with attorneys, with parents, with social workers. And I think particularly notable to me when I started to look into this, and I think people at OJJ started to realize that I was looking into this, I heard from a number of former staff members and even some current staff members who said, you know, I want to tell you what's going on because I don't think it's right. I was a teacher there for a year and felt like the kids that I was working with weren't getting what they needed. So we started looking into all of this. And I think I went over most of this, but just to make sure everyone has the same information, this is focused on OJJ secure care facilities specifically, so kids that are at non-secure facilities, which OJJ also contracts with, and clients or youth that are in OJJ custody may be in non-secure facilities as well. They generally go to school in the community, so they often enroll at schools that other students that are not in custody would attend. At OJJ secure care facilities, the schools are located at the juvenile prisons. What's unique, I think, in Louisiana is that the education at OJJ facilities is directly provided by OJJ. So OJJ is the entity that operates many things. They do probation, they do non-secure facilities, and secure care facilities, but they're also responsible for general education. The special school district, which is another state entity, is responsible for special education for youth with disabilities at OJJ facilities. So there are these two entities that are required to work together to provide education, and I think sometimes what we see in the process of representing individual students and then also in looking at data and trends across the board is that that relationship is challenging because we have two entities that do a number of different things, and collaborating can be part of the problem. When there are delays in providing services, when youth are moved, there's not always communication about that. And I think the final point to note, just as background, is that OJJ is heavily monitored. So the schools, like all schools in the state of Louisiana, are subject to monitoring requirements. They have to submit data every year. There are site visits. OJJ schools are considered alternative schools in the state, so all alternative schools have their own monitoring process. But they also have a unique OJJ-specific monitoring process that's the result of some legislation from several years ago. So I think one of the other takeaways we have is that this problem is not necessarily for lack of a structure of accountability, it's for lack of implementation, and I'll go into a little bit more of the takeaways. So based on sort of the review that we did of data and interviews and communication with staff and students, we have a number of takeaways. This is just a highlight of them. There are 7 key takeaways and a number of sub findings within them. But kind of big top line findings, OJJ schools are really among the worst performing schools in the state. So we found that on every measure we could look at, which included graduation rates, dropout rates, and of course exam scores, which are the required standardized test scores. In Louisiana, you have to take to pass and to graduate, grade retention, so the number of students that have to repeat a grade each year. OJJ schools are performing worse than about 98% of schools. So doing at every metric we could look at. I think the second thing is about students with disabilities in particular. So one of our findings is that students with disabilities are disproportionately represented in OJJ facilities. The data is not super clear, so we found that there's a big range. Some reports that the Louisiana Department of Education had said that there were under 5% of youth with disabilities in OJJ facilities. Some reports said closer to 30 or 40. National data suggests it could be as high as 70 when you look at trends across the board. So there's a big disparity in what that data looks like. We estimate it's between 30 and 50. So many youth in OJJ facilities have disabilities, whether they're academic behaviors, academic disabilities, learning disabilities, behavioral disabilities, or emotional disabilities that impact their ability to learn in school. And because they have disabilities, that would make them eligible for under federal law, they're eligible for special education and other related services like counseling and speech therapy, depending on the individual needs of the student. And unfortunately, in part because I think of this breakdown between OJJ and the special school district both being responsible for services, many students with disabilities are denied those services. So they may have an individualized education program, which is the required document for individuals with disabilities, but it may not be followed, or it may be followed in part, but not completely. So regularly we're working with youth that are denied services, and the remedy in those cases is compensatory education, so getting makeup services. But because of the transient nature of the population of youth in facilities, those services are not always delivered, or they're not delivered in a timely fashion. So there are some kids that I've worked with that just do not receive those services, and there's no real way to make it up. The third key finding is just how frequently school is closed. So I think at all facilities we talk to youth who say, you know, there might be a day that they just don't take them from their dorms and they're not sure why. Someone doesn't show up to work. Maybe one kid says they don't want to go to school, and then the whole dorm is denied school. Particularly egregiously, there were 2 examples in the past 2 years where school wasn't provided for a very extended period of time. So the first is at Acadiana Center for Youth at St. Martinville, which is a facility that OJJ opened in the summer of 2021. That facility did not have a school of any kind until November. Until the fall, and even when that happened, youth were only getting services for an hour a day for a long period of time. So there's another facility, Acadiana Center for Youth at Bunkie, where some incident reports demonstrated that there was a good 5-week period of time where there was no school of any kind. Not because there was vacation, because there was just no school. So these extended periods of time of school closures are incredibly problematic for kids, especially because all kids in OJJ facilities, like all students in the state, are required to receive 6 hours of school a day for 177 days a year. So the requirements for school and compulsory attendance are the same whether you're in custody or not. And unfortunately, that's not being hit. Those requirements are not being met. And then finally, like Terrence's experience, the student I started with, the vast majority of students in OJJ schools are required to repeat all or part of a grade when they return to schools in the community, because they're not necessarily getting the classes that they need to proceed on their graduation pathway. So I think it was important to us, in first beginning with these findings, demonstrating what the problems that we continually saw were at OJJ schools, but then looking into some recommendations. And I think in making those recommendations, one important piece of it was to recognize that there are multiple entities and institutions that need to be part of the solution, are both part of the problem and need to be part of the solution. So recognizing that OJJ is responsible for general education, and many of the changes and recommendations we make are directed to OJJ, but not exclusively. The special school district provides special education. Legislators, we're recommending that there be a more significant oversight. Judges need to play a role in holding OJJ accountable and reviewing school support and school progress for youth that judges are reviewing at review hearings. Educators in the community, I think, need to understand what's going on and then support youth when they return home, and advocates playing a role in oversight as well. So demonstrating the many entities that are part of this problem and part of this solution was important to us. So we have a number of key recommendations, and again, this is just kind of a summary of them. The full report gives many more. But the first is just fundamentally, I think, acknowledging that this is not inevitable. So we talked to people that are working in other states. We talked to organizations and institutions that are operating school in juvenile prisons in other states, and many of them are doing great things. So OJJ fundamentally, I think, no matter who is responsible ultimately for education, no matter what the structural breakdown looks like, there needs to be a focus on learning from best practices from organizations and states across the country. I think the second is about the importance of data and shared understanding of data. So we found that like what I was speaking about with the special education and disability rates, there's not great data for a number of things. The attendance rates that LDE has, that OJJ reports, say that over 95% of kids go to school on any given day. And we know from visiting, from talking to kids, that's just not true. So making sure that there's accurate data and that it's being provided, and also that OJJ is being held accountable for that, is a really important piece. The third is to the Louisiana Department of Education, utilizing the various consequences and accountability measures that are available to it under the law, including reconstituting OJJ school leadership if that's necessary, which is one of the consequences that the law specifically names, and other measures that would hold OJJ accountable. So not, making sure that there's some action so that the status quo doesn't continue. And then finally, OJJ and the special school district, if we are going to have this unique breakdown between general education and special education, that relationship needs to be stronger. There needs to be a really clear way that these two entities are communicating to ensure that kids are getting the services that they need. So that's the extent of my sort of description of the report. I'm happy to answer any questions and really encourage everyone to go to our website and read it in more detail.
Does anyone have any questions?
Yes.
Did you get the sense from some of the kids that you knew that some of them had been doing well in school prior to being sent to OJJ?
Definitely, I think we work with kids that had been doing well. We certainly work with kids, and the school to prison pipeline and all of the research around that, we know that we work with kids that had not been doing well. Many of the kids that we first begin representing upon arrest may not have been enrolled in school, may have been disconnected. So school has been a challenge for many of the clients that we work with, not for all of them. I think what we hear from kids is even if they had a difficult time in school, they felt more supported in their community schools. There were more social workers and counselors and people that they could speak to. There was a more robust support network for them. They were getting their special education services. Not everyone. I think there are problems that we see in schools in the community as well. But it's a big shock, I think, to then go to a place where they feel like they don't have those people are not in place, those mentors are not in place, and the infrequency of school is something that they hadn't experienced in the community. Yeah.
Gina Lewis, the Department of Health. Did you say this was a 3-year study?
No, it was about it over the course of a year. I've been at LCCR for 2 years on my fellowship. We started reviewing data and looking through the data we could find for about a year. My experiences with clients and representing youth started 2 years ago, so I guess you could say it's about 2 years.
Can you tell us the year it started and when?
Yeah, I started in 2021. We looked back, though, at data from previous to 2021. So when we looked at the graduation rate, when we looked at end-of-course exam data, that I think started in 2015 or so. So we were looking at historic data as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Did you find any correlation between the lack of school and violence or any sort of other behavioral problems of the young people in the facilities?
So that wasn't something we looked at directly. I do know that in reviewing incident reports from Acadiana Center for Youth at Bunkie, there was an article that recently came out, I think in I think it was in The Advocate, reviewing incident reports from the past year at Bunkie, and it looks at both violence and other incidents that happened in the facility as well as school closures. And I think there is a correlation when you look at that between days that school was closed and then what happens on the dorm, or maybe school is closed because of something that happened on the dorm, but then it perpetuates. And definitely talking to kids who are not getting school, they talk about being really bored. They talk about, I ask, what do you do all day if you're not in school? And they, maybe sit around and play games, but they're bored, and you can see how that could lead to other problems too.
I have a question. Did you have any data, and my apologies if I missed it, in regards to how many young people previously had an IEP or any other distinction prior to their coming to OJJ?
So we looked at the overall rate of youth with disabilities, which includes both youth with IEPs and youth with 504 plans. And it's hard to get good figures on that. We estimated that it's between 30 and 50%. I think the vast majority of those youth had IEPs before they entered custody. I know another challenge that my clients have experienced if they're in custody and we think that they haven't been identified but should get an IEP, that process can be very slow in OJJ. And in part because of this relationship between the special school district and OJJ and making that evaluation process work. So of the youth with disabilities and IEPs in OJJ, I would say the vast majority of them had them from the community.
Any other questions? Thank you so
Thank you.
much. And I'll make sure to send out the link
That would be great.
to all the members as well. Up next, we have Mr. Nelson, who's the Assistant Secretary of the Office of Juvenile Justice.
So Allison, the reason why I carry this around is because this is a really good report, and I applaud you on your work, your agency's work to develop this report. I have scheduled a meeting for my educators and I to sit down and really go page by page through the report. There's a lot of truth in this document, and so we appreciate you for your hard work. And so I want to start off my updates to you by picking up on some words that Allison has shared as well as Ms. Ryan. I've been at the agency maybe 6 months now, 7 months. Prior to going to OJJ, I was at the Supreme Court. Prior to that, I was a juvenile prosecutor in EBR. One of the things I see in our state that is really a deficit is advocacy for these children. Orleans and EBR are pretty fortunate. They have a specialized juvenile court, but more importantly, they have advocates, attorneys for these children who really understand the importance of advocating. OJJ, we have a part in all of this, but these children, they are appointed lawyers, and these lawyers need to do their job and advocate. These educational issues, that is something that should be raised in the court, and OJJ should be held accountable. So I really would advise this body, you should take time to see what's going on in Orleans and what's going on in EBR. So EBR is my jurisdiction that I kind of cut my teeth in the juvenile justice arena. One thing I can tell you that we did in EBR was that we approached this work as a collaborative. The prosecutors understood that, yeah, your job is to prosecute the case, but your job is also to make sure this child's rehabilitative needs are met and to not be an obstacle to that child's ability to thrive. In the 6 months I've been with OJJ, but prior to that, even at the Supreme Court, I traveled the state, and it's very disheartening what I see statewide. Justice doesn't look the same throughout the state. And I've reached out to Mr. Pittman and shared some of my concerns and what I believe needs to happen. Ms. Ryan, you mentioned judges. Yes, judges are a very important part of this. And so I think in those areas of the states where we have judges who do this on a day-to-day basis, this is their docket, they understand how to work with these children. But if a judge has to deal with juvenile cases once a month, that case is going to look a lot different from a judge who deals with it on a daily basis. So the good news, what I would say is many of the things that Ms. Ryan laid out as recommendations, yes, that's what our state needs to do, and we are working on that list. Had not had a chance to see your list, but those are priorities that Deputy Secretary Summers and myself have placed in order. Likewise with Ms. Zimmerman's report, these are things that we've already made a priority. What I think you will see under my leadership as well as Deputy Secretary Summers is really getting away from this correctional approach to juvenile justice rehabilitation. I'm not going to really bash my predecessors, but one of the things I shared with the governor prior to me even being on the radar to be in this position is that you cannot make the approach a correctional approach, because if children are just sitting around not having their needs met, then they will act out and you will see behavior problems. So we're really working hard to get this agency in the business of rehabilitation. So what I would just add to Ms. Zimmerman's report is that one of the things that Deputy Secretary Summers did when he got to OJJ was he recognized that we needed a new head of our education department. So we have a new director, Chanel DeVille, PhD, and Ms. DeVille has studied what's happening, and she has a plan in place to really get us back on track with the educational need. Also, we brought in a special education director, Jessica White. We think that's helping to ensure that the special education needs are being met for the children. We're not there yet, but we're putting things in place. And so Jessica is able to work with SSD and make sure that the needs of the children are being met. The last piece that we felt needed to happen on the educational side is we now have a Title I coordinator within the office. Now, I try to stay in my lane, but I'm also forcing myself to become more knowledgeable about all of these different aspects with education. And I feel the Title I coordinator is something that was missing, and that's going to help us really make sure we're taking advantage of all the funding opportunities to make sure the children needs are being met. I mean, the goal with these children is to make sure that when they are placed in OJJ's custody, that there's not a gap in their educational attainment. Educating the children in this setting can be a challenge because you factor in behavior issues with the youth, but that's not an excuse. These children are entitled to have their educational needs met. So what I can report to you is that the goal is always to make sure that there's not a gap from when the child leaves our custody and returns back to the community. But some of the kids that are in our custody, we don't want to delay their ability to get their diploma or to get their GED. So since the summer, and I'll break this down by each facility, for BCCY, we have had 5 youth who have achieved their high school diploma and will be eligible for TOPS. We had 2 youth at BCY achieve their high set. At the Monroe facility, we had 3 youth graduate, 4 were able to get their high set. At Columbia, and Columbia is really more of our fast track program, so it would make sense we wouldn't have as many because those children, they're not supposed to stay with us for a prolonged period of time. We had 3 youth get their diploma and be eligible for TOPS. And then for Acadiana, we had 4 youth who were able to graduate and be eligible for TOPS. Vocational training is something that has to be a part of this rehabilitative process. And so what I will tell you is that for every one of our sites, there is in place a vocational programming. The challenge for OJJ is COVID really hit our agency hard. And so we're rebuilding our teaching staff on the vocational side. I still have 1 or 2 teachers who are out on FMLA, and so as an agency, we're looking at moving forward, notwithstanding that those teachers are on FMLA. And so we will continue to build those vocational opportunities for our youth. And so just to give you an example, culinary, horticulture, welding, carpentry, fiber optics. We want to make sure that for those children who perhaps will not go to college, that they still can have a skill that can transfer into their ability to be self-sufficient. Deputy Secretary Summers has launched an initiative, a pilot. We are partnering with a group that's gonna help with some life skills, online training. And so we are gonna pilot that at the Ware Center with our girls and also at the Acadiana Center for Youth. Now, let me turn my attention to current, well, before I do that, I agree with what Ms. Ryan said, and we are going to take full advantage of the OJJDP grant dollars that we were fortunate to receive. This has to be, or let me say it this way, the focus needs to be more on community-based services. And so I think where the state needs to go is that before these youth are being pushed in the deep end of the system, we can do more in the community to do diversion and to have alternatives. And so we do have grant money that we receive. OJJ has about $5 million that's allocated. It's from the Criminal Justice Reinvestment Funds. And those funds are dispersed throughout the state to work with the local governments, the local parishes, to develop diversionary type programs in their communities. I was just sharing with Jamie, I think there could be more money to go to the front end as opposed to the back end. And so whatever support this commission can do to help OJJ, this year, we gave all that money out. And so there is definitely a need for more funding because the locals are applying. But they need to be good programs. And as I shared with one of my colleagues, it's not about just having numbers, it's about having good outcomes, because the goal is to keep kids from coming into the system. So one initiative that Deputy Secretary Summers is piloting, and we're working with the folks in Lafayette. And why Lafayette? Because we looked at the data. So I think somebody, Allison, you may have said data, Ms. Ryan may have said data. OJJ has a lot of good data. And I always knew, I thought this agency had data, but now that I'm in working, there's a lot of rich data that can help us understand what's going on with the children. And so we have a really great data analyst. I shared with the vice chair. I think make some requests because we need to use that to drive our decision making. But we looked at the data, and what the data showed us was that Lafayette, they have a high number of youth who are being pushed into the system. And so we want to go to Lafayette with this pilot program, and it's going to be a community-based program. It's going to be called the LaMark. So for those of you who may be familiar with the Jack or the Mark, this is a way of, if a youth were to get arrested, there's something in place that serves as diversion, that we can try to build services around that child and the family so that the prosecutor will see that there's an option as opposed to prosecuting. The judges will feel comfortable that we don't have to prosecute this case, let's give the family services. And so we are taking money out of our budget to work with Lafayette to build something, because the idea is we want to replicate this throughout the state. And so we're really excited about this opportunity. I do want to turn to the OJJDP grant. So this is $1 million grant that Louisiana was fortunate to get, our agency was fortunate to get. Originally, the focus was just going to be on OJJ. What can we do to better ourselves as a agency? But Deputy Secretary Summers and myself, and there's another member of our team, Darren Potan from the Baton Rouge community. Darren is someone who's been heavily involved in juvenile justice reform work. Deputy Secretary Summers was involved in juvenile justice reform work. I was involved in juvenile justice reform work in the state. And so we feel like we have a team in place, and we're adding some more parts to our team. But we looked at this grant and said, okay, that's fine. We can just look at OJJ, but what about what's feeding these children into the system? Why are we not looking at that? So working with OJJDP, and we do have a technical advisors, CSG. It's all these acronyms I'm having to learn in this new role, but we have a technical consultant that's working with us. We want to take this grant and look at this system, our system, from the beginning to the end. So from the point that a child is arrested, to the point that that case is referred to a prosecutor, to the point that that case is before a judge, a decision is being made, whether to keep the child in the community, whether to place the child in state's custody, once the child comes to OJJ, and even what happens to that child when it's time for re-entry back to their home. We're going to use the funding to look at the system from start to finish, because OJJ, this is what Deputy Secretary Summers and I keep trying to reiterate, we're the back end of the system. So decisions are being made before that child is placed in our custody. Now, once the child is in our custody, we have a responsibility to take care of that child, to make sure that child is healthy and safe. However, we gotta start looking at what's happening on the front end of the system. So where we are at this point, we wanna partner with the JRAC. So we met with Vice Chair Womack to explore how can we, OJJ, work with JRAC with this grant funding to really try to create out of this some legislation that I believe will help us prioritize our children. And so hopefully you as a commission, you'll be getting some updates real soon. The next thing I want to talk about briefly is bed space in the state. So you're probably going to see something in the news. We recently reached out to all of our juvenile court judges across the state to let them know that currently OJJ, there is a bed space capacity for both secure and non-secure placement. Many of our non-secure providers, they, like OJJ, they got hit really hard by the pandemic, and so they're struggling with staffing issues, but we don't want that to be an obstacle for a child to be properly placed in a non-secure placement. Not every child needs to be in secure placement, but we're finding that many of our providers are still trying to get their staffing numbers up, and we're keeping a pressure on them to say, well, we have a contract with you and we need you to take these children into your care. But it is a day-to-day task of trying to release a child from OJJ's custody so that we can receive a child. And I want to say that apart again. Making space so that we can receive a child. So don't miss what I'm saying. We're still pushing children into the system. Right now, statewide, I have 53 children who are waiting to be placed in OJJ's custody, who are either in a detention facility waiting for placement, or perhaps the judge has said, I'll put you on house arrest. So at the Bridge City campus, that campus, we have downsized the population, and Bridge City is now our sex offender treatment facility. We currently have 28 youth at that facility. Full capacity could probably be right at about 42, but again, these are children that they are there solely to get sex offense rehabilitation. Acadiana, St. Martinville, the current population right now is 17, and there is a plan that we're working with to try to see at some point, can we downsize that population even more? Columbia, which is a part of the Monroe facility at Columbia, I currently have 48 youth. And again, that's a fast track program, but Columbia is at full capacity. The Monroe campus, we currently have 82 youth there. And because we are down one dorm, so the Cypress unit was destroyed during one of the riots. That's a 32-bed unit, but Cypress is inhabitable. I cannot put a child in that unit because it's not safe for the child. And so we're in the process of making some major repairs, hopefully by the fall. Cypress will be back up and running. But without Cypress, that does limit our ability to place children in secure care. And finally, the West Feliciana campus, the Angola facility. And why do we call it West Feliciana? Because I want to talk about Angola. You know, that is a temporary placement. And as I shared with Ms. Womack last night, Angola should be a wake-up call for the entire state of Louisiana. You can sit and point your fingers at OJJ and say shame on OJJ, but we're all in this together, folks. So what happened in our state that became the option? But West Feliciana, it is a temporary facility. And Deputy Secretary Summers and I, we say that every day. This is temporary. We got a campus that's coming online. If we can get that new facility in Monroe up and running, then Angola can perhaps be something of the past. And I do say that. The day will come where we're not going to have children at West Feliciana. But I'm not calling it Angola for my children because, yeah, I did go into that facility. We did some major work in there because I did not want it to scream jail, prison. Because by state law, when a child is removed and placed in state's custody, we're supposed to be rehabilitating. We're not supposed to be imprisoning children. But like I tell young people, if you confine somebody in a space where they can't leave, then that is imprisonment. But we're working to continue to ensure that our youth, our staff, and the community can be safe. So currently at West Feliciana, we have 7 youth. Now, originally, we phased in 8 youth. We were already able to transition 1 youth away from that facility because that is a transitional treatment unit. It's not supposed to be a permanent placement. The children who will be transferred to West Feliciana, they're there to help them de-escalate their behavior. And once they have de-escalated and they're ready to return back to general population, that child goes back to a general population campus. And so we already have 1 youth who was able, within 4 weeks, to transition out. That facility can hold up to 24 youth, but Deputy Secretary Summers and I have been adamant, we're gonna do this right. We're not gonna put anybody in harm's way. And so we have to get that facility staffed properly. And until we're at a level where we have sufficient staff, we're not gonna send any more kids there. So that brings me to my very, very last point I wanna make. So we sent a letter out to the juvenile judges because taking a data approach, what our data showed us is that we have some children who should not be in OJJ's custody. Do you guys remember Article 898 that was passed by the legislature to mandate that after 9 months, the state is supposed to look at that adjudicated youth who's not serving a mandatory sentence. So let's take aside children who have to serve mandatory sentence. So those are generally kids who have maybe committed a murder, armed robbery, or rape. We're talking about nonviolent offenses. Those children, by law, should only be in OJJ's custody if the determination is made that they have to go in custody for a short period of time. So the law was amended to basically say juvenile courts have to have mandatory review hearings. And at that review hearing, the question before the court is, can this child rehabilitative needs be met in the community? So we looked at our numbers, looked at our data, and we were really disturbed at what we found. I have children who have been in my care and custody for 3 years for a nonviolent offense. And when we go to court, the judge is saying, I don't think you are ready. That is not the legal question before the court. It's not about, are you ready? The question is, can this child be returned back home to continue their rehabilitative needs? And if the judges are saying no, then really the question needs to be, well, what services can we provide in your community? Because most of these kids is education, it's anger management, it's mental health, it might be substance abuse. These are things that should be in every community within this state. And so we sent the letter to the juvenile judges letting them know that our legal team will file motions to start releasing these children. And what I've told my legal team, if the judge says no, then we're going to take an appeal. Now, that's my judge. That's my lawyers. What about that child's lawyer? I met with LCCR about a week ago, their executive council, and we've gotten a commitment that LCCR will join us in trying to start advocating for these children. But there are some remedies right now that can happen, that can take place to get these children who don't need to be sitting in our custody. And so that was a decision that Deputy Secretary Summers and I made. And so we've already started getting some very positive feedback from some of our judges who are saying, file a motion, and I will step the child down. The last thing I just briefly will end on is that I do believe, as Ms. Ryan said, a lot of the recommendations she set out in her presentation to the group, these are things that we have already identified, and we are wholeheartedly willing to work on those recommendations set out. And so our goal is to ensure that only children who need to be removed from their communities are placed in state custody. But even once they're placed in custody, they should not just languish in custody. So Allison, again, this is great. And we welcome this kind of feedback. And so I'm happy to take any questions that you may have, but I just want to assure this body, I think, as I shared with our TAs, I feel like the moment is right in this state for some real conversation on juvenile justice reform. You know, Ms. Womack and I, we go way back, and I know, Ms. Womack, I'm probably not on the side that you would like me to be on, but we share a lot of common ideas on what needs to happen for the betterment of our children. And so what I've told OJJDP, and I do want to touch at one point. So Ms. Ryan, you did mention, and we appreciate the help that you offered our state as we're dealing with this transition we're in. And we did take up OJJDP on their offer. One of the offers was removing children. So I told you we got 50 kids that are waiting. That number has been pretty consistent since I've been at OJJ. So one of the recommendations was, well, could you place children out of state? We talked about it, and we said, you know, if that is an option, maybe we do explore it. And we did. We met with OJJDP. They connected us with an organization. An organization came to Louisiana. They looked at about 200 of our cases. But this is what, and I need my state to understand this because we were receptive to the help. The organization made clear to us, now we don't want any kids who are in your custody for violent offenses. I said, well, can you elaborate on that? Well, we want your low-risk children. Well, can you elaborate a little bit more? What do you consider low risk? Because what I consider low risk, you may not consider low risk. Well, any child with a gun-related charge, we don't want them. Okay, well, who else? Any child with a carjacking, an armed robbery, a rape, we don't want them. Okay, well, we still have a lot of kids, but I don't know how I feel about a low-risk offender because the low-risk offenders, they really should not be in our custody that long. And I will say, most of those kids, they do tend to transition out. So this entity, they looked at about 200 of our cases, and they came up with about 30 or 40 youth who kind of fit within the moderate level range. And so there was serious conversation. Do we take our Louisiana kids and move them out of state? There was a lot of discussion about the price. It was going to be very costly to do it. But look, I mean, price should not really be a matter when we're talking about our children. But I just want to assure the commission, we did explore that option. And at the end, just the logistics, it did not work out. There was still a lot of more information that the consultants wanted, and we just didn't feel comfortable about the population that was being identified, because if I send a child out of state, I cannot really assure that that parent's going to be able to visit with the child. Now, there was some consideration. Well, we could fly them up, and we tried to explore that. But we were appreciative of the help. I just don't want the commission to think that we just blatantly turned down the assistant. So with that, I will take any questions that you may have. Yes, ma'am.
My question relates to the girl population. Did you mention those numbers?
Yes, ma'am. So currently we have probably right at, and the numbers change daily, I would say 28 girls are in our custody, and that includes both secure care and group home setting. So the number's right at about 28.
Do you have the number for the secure care girls? That's the number that I want.
Yes, ma'am. The secure care number is right at about 11.
And all those girls are at where?
Yes, ma'am, they are at where. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have about where. I can talk about that if you would like.
No, that was my only question.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
So I know I probably have 1,000 questions, but I want to make sure we don't go too long, because we still have some stuff for the agenda, and then maybe there are public comments, and maybe if not, we could circle back. But I think a majority of my questions I'll probably just follow up, because it'll be about data, and I want to confer with some members just about, like, as you offered, you know, that you share data with the commission. I mean, I just want to really kind of state that it was just, you know, we were just disheartened that the governor didn't speak to this commission or any of the other many bodies that are working around various juvenile justice stuff. But before the decision was made to send the young people to Angola, I'm curious, and maybe this is something you can follow up in writing, in regards to the accounting of the monies that was spent on renovating Angola, because I feel like that probably was a hefty amount. Like, and what are the sources of that funding? And specifically, as you were talking about, like, the cost of the fact that you all are working to renovate Cypress, and that was kind of a holdup, because they're probably, you know, we spend all of the time probably doing the work there. We may not have ever had to transfer to young people. So I, you know, like to maybe hear a little bit about that. And then, like I said, you also talked about, and Ms. Ryan mentioned it too, that a crucial part of really rehabilitation is working with the community. Is that happening? And if not, why not? And there'll be like a listing of all the different, you mentioned about the vocational programming at the facilities, like what are those programs at all of the different facilities? But again, I don't want to take a whole lot of time in regards to a lot of those questions, but because we could follow up, I just wanted to see if other folks had some quick questions, because we have a couple other reports.
I just had a quick question on this capacity issue. Have you guys ever reached out to youth advocate programs out of Harrisburg?
Youth advocate out of,
Programs, have you ever heard of them?
I've heard of youth advocates, but I don't know if I know that program.
It's a nonprofit.
Right.
Please, I mean, they work nationally. They can go into the community. They hire people in the community. It's 100% community based. You know, I've had these conversations for the past 15 years, and I'm like, why hasn't Louisiana just signed a huge contract with them to help you deal with these kids? It's 9 months in secure care. You may as well put them in Utah. That's a long time to be away from home. Now, in 3 years, I mean, I think you're absolutely right, Mr. Nelson, but, you know, you should be trying everything you can to keep these kids in the community, and looking outside the state for that with a proven nonprofit, it's a no-brainer to me.
So let me just say this, Matilda. I agree with you, but that's a question that legislatively I think we need to explore, because when you say we keep them out of our custody, there is a judge that says, I don't believe you can get your needs met in the community. So I'm removing you out of your parents' legal custody and placing you in the custody of OJJ. So I don't dispute what you're saying, but once the order is placed, OJJ does not have the statutory ability to say we're going to deny that order and provide services in the community. So we are willing to invest dollars, but I will look into that program because maybe that's something we can contract with, and it will be a service that judges can use.
And just like Gina, I don't want to take up too much of the time either, but you know, for 30 years now, 20 years that I've been here, Steve and I have been working on this stuff. The judges are a critical part. There's no question. And yes, it would be great to change legislation, but we've built the trust of judges in the past, right? And there's a pilot that is effective enough. Yeah, a pilot that's effective somewhere might be a way to do this with a proven entity like that.
I like that.
And just, yeah.
I like that. Thank you. And where are they out of?
Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
Yes, sir. I will look into that.
I'm happy to put you all together in an email. We've had contracts with them. Sometimes some local entities here have had contracts with them, but that's probably years ago.
Okay.
Any other pressing questions?
I do want to ask about where, actually. In light of the recent report, I guess it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, have y'all changed any of your procedures for monitoring that contract with Ware? And sub-question, have y'all interfaced or communicated with the local authorities in Coushatta, in Red River Parish, about proper responses to indications of abuse and neglect in facilities?
So we have, after that article came out, the leadership of OJJ, we went and we met with the current leadership of Ware, because contractually we do monitor those contracts. What we found in that meeting was that since the current administration has been in office, a lot more has been implemented for oversight purposes. And I know one of my predecessors was cited in that article, and I think questions should be asked of her under her leadership.
At approximately 10:30 p.m. University.
I'm sorry.
I think perhaps some questions could be presented to our predecessor under her leadership, what was being done as far as oversight. But what I can tell you, Mr. Pittman, based upon our meeting with the Ware leadership, in the last 2 years, things were put in place to make sure accountability was being documented, safety for the youth. I know the article talked about girls running away. Some funding was provided to address youth possibly leaving that campus. As far as local law enforcement, so it's important to remember with Ware you have a couple entities that have oversight. DCFS, so they have their investigative arm.
The detention side, yeah.
For the detention side, that's correct. We have our monitoring over the contracts, as well as there were incidents that were referred from OJJ to local law enforcement for follow-up investigation. I think even LDH has some oversight with that facility. We did submit a recommendation to the governor. I think the director who was over that facility for several years has recently retired. And so based upon that retirement, our conversation with Ware is that this will be a month-by-month process. Because we were disturbed, as probably others, about many of the allegations that were raised in that article.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And just kind of for the record, I wanted to just put a couple of other questions that you can follow up with.
Yes, ma'am.
But one thing I'd like to request is that this commission be notified if there are any additional transfers of young people to Angola that will be planned. All the different activities, I think I might have said that in regard, that's that are provided for those young people, including education. I think it would probably be great if we would even receive like a monthly reporting of like the number of youth that are housed in your custody. And there may be some additional things that the commission members come up with that we might ask for on a monthly basis. But I know we had talked about during the first meeting that, you know, we're in this as a partnership and we can't help if we don't know what the issues are. I remember Representative Duplessis stating that really early on. And so also a full accounting like of all the OJJDP grants, I think would be great, especially, just an accounting of all the OJJDP grants. And I think I'd love to request a tour of Angola for commission members who are interested in attending.
A tour of West Feliciana.
Okay. Tomato.
No, if you let us know that, we'll make that happen.
And even when you're reporting, because I know you were given the numbers that you talked about, like all the different facilities, but where it's just always left out. So like, you know, you guys oversee that facility, or you should be, so
we have a contractual relationship with it, but
Yeah, but
there is contractual oversight, yes, ma'am.
Yeah. That's all the questions that I have. And so we're just gonna move forward. And I have to give the quick report, and I apologize. Our consultants couldn't make it to Baton Rouge today, so I'm gonna go real quickly over for the subcommittee, what has happened. I personally sit on several state tables. And this one is Children's Cabinet Advisory Board, the Office of OJJDP as well, the Task Force for the Student Discipline and Behavior. All of these things are part of Act 1225, and what I hear on a regular basis is that, you know, the work is duplicated or folks don't know what's happening from one group to the next. And so the coordination of services was really important part of the juvenile justice reform. And so what we did was took, and I don't know how do you work, I'm not even sure how you work this, forgive me. Okay, I think that's the first one. Everything that was part of the statute and put it in the plan so that we could keep track of all of the work that was set forth in regards to what JRAC was was by statute supposed to oversee. So the coordination of services, definitely we need to be able to do work, right? And so we put together some subcommittees. We've already met 4 times in 2022, once in April, May, August, November. The members are fluid, but we were definitely trying to make sure they consisted of the state departments, of the child welfare system, the public welfare system, rather, education, incarceration, because these are the groups that were part of the reform. So as Mr. Nelson has spoke about, and we talked about really early, our work is about preventing young people from ever entering the system. And we can only do that if we are working together and ensuring that the other parts of the systems that impact our families are held accountable. So the 4 subcommittees were created, and so the groups worked and narrowed the list of 8 to 10 initiatives. Am I moving? Okay, 8 to 10 initiatives to 3 priority initiatives. So these are just the committees that I already spoke about. Okay, I don't know, obviously, really how to do this. Okay, here we go. I'm getting the hang of it now. So we created the top initiatives to focus on. And the subcommittees begin to work on the priority initiatives, and members begin to share the critical information with each other. The great thing about being in those spaces was that folks were like, oh my God, like this is happening. I've never heard that before. So just having those conversations to understand what is happening across the state and the best interests of our young people, I think we would have found, there's just a lot of work happening in lots of different areas. So OJJ has been invited and has been involved throughout the process, particularly in the incarceration committee. And we had facilitators that led the subcommittees in a reflection activity on progress and process. And at the most recent meeting, members expressed that the enthusiasm about continuing to serve on the subcommittee and the broad agreement regarding the slight modifications. So we narrowed the stuff and we decided instead of 4 groups, because there was a lot of conversation that was happening, especially around in education, that then it was harder to translate. So what we're looking forward to in 2023 is like having a front end working group that includes the prevention and intervention folks that's talking about the single state entity, redirection towards prevention. All of this is already mandated. This isn't anything new that we came up with. This is legislation, right? How we're working in the education system, improving handling suspension expulsions, but I think that'll also have a lot to do with like IEPs. As we heard from Allison, a lot of the young people have IEPs, and I think if we are able to work with the education department to really have young people's IEPs be fully implemented, we see a lot of less kids going into the deeper end of the system. And then just data collection and analysis, we really have to work around how to get the information that we just talked about and have real meetings, right? Like it doesn't make sense for us to just talk about stuff, but like these are working group meetings where we're just trying to figure out how to get this system coordinated, how to bring, be the hub and bring the majority of the groups together so we're not duplicating work. For instance, I was chairing the Student Discipline and Behavior Task Force, and this legislative session, they created a new Student Discipline and Mental Health Task Force, and we're doing the same work, and it's really redundant. So it's gonna be really important that what comes out of this commission is that we're working through a legislative process, that we're able to identify the issues that happen when folks come in and they really want to work on a particular issue. And instead of creating a new task force, we can see what's already in existence. And so the back end is going to be working on the incarceration piece, education in the secure facilities. But what's most important, I think, is really the data and being able to look in real time, like what's going on in the various communities. And also, again, because I'm sitting on the Children's Cabinet Advisory Board and have attended the Children's Cabinet meetings, we know that another part of Act 1225 was the creation of a new legislation the following year, and it was around the Children, Youth, and Planning Boards. And the Children's Cabinet actually hired a coordinator that is looking at how we can ensure that those boards are in existence in every jurisdiction, so that we're getting real-time information in each of the jurisdictions. And so I think that just really will partner really well with some of what Mr. Nelson stated in regards to the assessments, right? And, even working again more closely with OJJDP. I think, and I will send out this PowerPoint presentation to everyone so that they can have it and they'll see. Some of the members have been attending those subcommittee meetings, which I think is great because we want to be fluid and consistent, and we're all having the same conversations and we're all the same page and we're working as a team so we can create great coordinated systems of care. Then thank you. We've been working with the TrepWise, some facilitators that have been very, very helpful. So I'd like to thank them in their absence. The next thing on the agenda was announcements. I don't have any, so I don't know if any other commission member has any announcements that they want to share. Hearing none, the next meeting date is scheduled for December 9th. Does that work with folks' schedules? If not, we can try to change that date. What I'd love to see that this last meeting is that we can bring in the consultants and it can really be a working meeting that we start. We have a plan from the legislation, but how are we going to be working moving forward so that we can support OJJ and be in partnership, but also bring in the folks from the public welfare system and the education system to ensure that they're fulfilling their mandate, right? And so we don't want to just sit around the room, as some folks said at a meeting yesterday, but rather roll up our sleeves and do some real work so that we'll have a plan. We'll be able to develop measurement too, so we'll know if we're being successful. Any questions around that? And then, so we have some time for public comments if someone wanted to make public comments.
If I can just make one quick comment. Dr. Stephen Philippi, again with LSU Institute for Public Health and Justice. I just want to say the leadership that's here, thank you. I just want to reiterate, I know several of you all from the reform efforts that we've gone, and I just want to say, Administrator Ryan, this isn't representative of our leadership, and I'm embarrassed of how few people are at this meeting. We have had judges, we have had DAs, we have had law enforcement come together, we have done major reforms in this state, and this is not a show of what we've done in the past. So I'm hoping we can get there. I truly do. We've done great things, and I think we can get there, but this representation is very, very embarrassing that you've made this trip. So I'm glad you're here. I appreciate your comments and look forward to seeing this committee continue to work.
Tom, bring the mic over that way. Thank you.
I'm Tom Costanza with the Louisiana Conference of Catholic Bishops. Very informative. From our theological perspective, restorative justice is the concept that has many ramifications. Restoring the victim, restoring the offender, and restoring the community. Within restoring the offender, the two parts would include both people doing training, or the guards or the staff, and how they see restorative justice principles, and also how does the offender see what he did to the victim. So it's really a comprehensive approach that's rooted in the dignity of the human person and valued for life. So I just would comment, as we're doing the changes, to keep in mind that we have to restore justice to the victim, the offender, and rehabilitate, and then the wider community participates in that. Thank you.
Thank you. Just in regards to the last two comments, thank you so much for making them both, because I believe that you're absolutely right. And all of the work that had been put in, Mr. Utter talked about being here for 30 years, and I've been right along the tail, although he did say when he hired me that it was gonna be 3 years to reform the system. I always have to bring that up, because 25 years later, for me, we are still doing the same thing. And part of this work was about restorative, right, practices. But I also heard Mr. Nelson say how, lately in his predecessors or whatever, went back to a punitive system. But the frustrating part is that our children get blamed all the time, and they're the most vulnerable, and they're held to the highest level of accountability when the system that we have that has a roadmap put in place doesn't follow it, and then our young people pays the price. And we have to really not roll back because there's no reason we should have went back to punitive when we knew that restorative practices and positive interventions are what works, as Ms. Ryan brought up. And Dr. Philippa, I'm so sorry that I always do butcher your name. Thank you for saying that, because it is disappointing, because this group is set up to do great things and great work, and we should have a full house. But I don't know why it seems like we prefer to start all over opposed to evaluate where we're failing and what the gaps are, and then do better and fix that. We just want to start it all over. And I'm hoping and praying that this is a new day, because when we do that, our kids end up in Angola, and we can rename it the West Feliciana Parish all day long. Our children are in Angola on a death row facility. And I mean, that's embarrassing for Louisiana. It's extremely sad for our kids. So I'm just hoping that we realize as policymakers, and having Ms. Ryan here and the commitment, and hoping the commitment that I feel like I heard from OJJ today, of us all working together and also bringing in the other entities. This is how we're going to build a better Louisiana for our children and a better Louisiana for our kids. And I'll leave it at that. If there are other remarks or anything from the commission. And I'm really glad to see you today. And I'm sure you know you've worked with us before. This is your legacy as well.
Well, I wanted to be here today, and I haven't been able to make the other meetings, but obviously we're about to be in our budget process, and it's something I'm particularly interested in. We've been working very closely with OJJ as they wrestle with these problems and trying to make responsible and smart decisions. And I think it's very obvious to everybody. The reason that we wound up where we did was that we really had no other choice. We had to make a decision. We had to make moves out of Bridge City. We had to go to a place that we felt like could be quickly, with quotes around that, quickly made available. But we're looking forward to the future. We understand what's happened in the past, and the governor has recognized the challenges that we faced in the legislation that passed and with the problems that we've had in the facilities, but we're committed to working toward them, and we're also hopeful we're going to be able to provide some adequate financing to make certain that the construction projects that are underway are going to be continuing as rapidly as possible. And I appreciate the work of the commission, and Ryan, I'm sorry I have my back to you, but thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, everyone. And with that, if there's nothing